So you got in at an early age. What was it that made you think that you could do this for a job? We'll pass this back and forth.
Well, truthfully, you know, I was a good student. My mother and father, as every Jewish mother and father thought, they had a young doctor or maybe lawyer. Nothing else would have done, would have worked. And photography was just a hobby. I honestly thought I would outgrow it. And truthfully, I didn't know there was a profession called photojournalism. I didn't have any idea. It was fun. What I said in the CBS piece was true. You know, it's the best seat in the house. I couldn't afford a ticket to an NFL game, but now I was on the sidelines. I certainly couldn't afford to sit next to the Yankee dugout or the Oriole dugout or whatever. But with the photo pass, when you're shooting, you're right there in the best seat. So I was a sports fan. I liked taking pictures. It was natural, and I did enjoy seeing my pictures published, but I still do.
So you know this guy. Oh. Hello, you turned it off?
I didn't touch it.
Reset. Hello. Oops, technical difficulty. Oh, there we go. So this guy, Muhammad Ali, obviously an icon. You helped make him an icon, right?
Well, if I helped make him an icon, there isn't a single person who's ever worked for him who didn't become a hero because of Ali. Muhammad, he never met a camera he didn't like. He never met a microphone he didn't like. He never met a writer's notepad that he didn't like. I tell people all the time with Ali, I used to say to him, and there was Sports Illustrated, but he was just the same with the high school kid who showed up for a yearbook picture. With me, I'd show up and I would say, Muhammad, I need 20 minutes. And he would say, okay, but last time you took advantage of me, no more than 20 minutes, and an hour later he was suggesting poses. For example, and this is a true story, Sports Illustrated chose Ali after he beat George Foreman in Zaire. They chose him as Sportsman of the Year. And I was sent to photograph him. And we talked about, this was one of the few times when I had a meeting with the managing editor and the art director, and we discussed what we wanted. And my idea was to photograph Ali in black tie, which is the cover of the book. The idea was to show him sort of like a GQ cover, an Esquire cover. And they liked it, and that was what we settled on. So I called Ali's wife, and they were living in Chicago at the time, and I told them what I wanted to do, and she said, Ali doesn't have a tuxedo, but we'll arrange to get one rented. You can pick it up when you're here. Anyway, I picked up Ali at his house. We had rented the Playboy studio in Chicago to shoot the picture. And picked up Ali. We got his tuxedo. Only when he comes to the car, he's got a garment bag with him. I had no idea what was in the garment bag. But we get to the studio, and the first thing, I can't get him off the elevator bank because it's the Playboy offices, and they have life-size. We okay? And they have life-size transparencies of Playmates. Ali isn't leaving the elevator bank, and it took up half the time we were supposed to use for the photo shoot. But we get into the studio, and I always wanted to get the job done first. I took the pictures of Ali in tuxedo, and I knew the assignment was already successful. He couldn't take a bad picture of Muhammad. He was movie star good looking, and he loved the camera, and he knew exactly how to pose. He had a disarming smile. Everything about Ali made good pictures. So I knew I was home free. And Muhammad, and I used up pretty much all the time I had asked him for. He says, well, I got a couple of other things I'd like to try on. And he opens up the garment bag, and he's got 2 African robes that President Mobutu had given him in Zaire. And I shot 2 or 3 rolls of film. I hear the cash register clinking, ka-ching, 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 because I shoot him in his first robe. He takes the second robe out. He's got his walking stick as well, which he wants in the picture. Then he's got his new sport jacket. He said, you're going to take some pictures. I just got this jacket. I like it. I want some pictures of the jacket. And then he had a second sport jacket. Now, I think I brought 20 rolls of film. There's 12 shots on a roll of film, and I had this picture, the cover I had in the first 6 frames, because just in case the subject bolts, you want to know damn well that you got the picture first. And anyway, I shot every single frame of the 20 rolls, and I don't think he was happy with me because he was looking at me like he had a couple of other things in mind. But he was always like that. You couldn't miss. I lecture occasionally at colleges, and not that often, but usually photojournalism classes, and I always tell the kids that want to know, how can they have a career like I had? And I said, it's real easy. Find yourself a young Muhammad Ali and stick around for 30 years with him, and you'll be a superstar.
Not unlike Ali is this guy, and I want you to tell me about this picture here.
Oh, Joe Namath. Wow, I was a Giants fan, not a Jets fan, so I really wasn't that impressed with Joe Namath. But he's another guy who likes the camera. I mean, there are people that I think I call it a visual charisma, but there are people who simply know. I mean, I'm not natural at posing people, and I benefit from people who know how to pose, and Ali, of course, did, and Namath was fabulous. I mean, I've interviewed Namath both for a couple of films that I made. I make movies these days rather than shoot stills, and Namath is a delight to work with. He always was. There are people who, if they say yes, they're going to do it right.
So here's a picture of Bill Shoemaker. Talk about how important it is, or how you see emotion through the camera lens and how that is conveyed.
I usually don't see the emotion until I've seen the finished film, when it's processed. You know, when you're shooting, I don't think that much about it. Shoemaker was a good subject, not as comfortable as Ali or Namath in front of the camera, but I shot a lot of horse racing. I shot 16 Kentucky Derbies over my years at Sports Illustrated. You saw a copy of my boxing book was published by Toshin last year, in December of 2020, and I am currently doing another book with Toshin, which will be my horse racing and horses. It's got polo and equestrian and steeplechase and harness racing in it, as well as flat racing. But jockeys always fascinated me. Well, first off, how many subjects can I look down at? So this was kind of, for any number of good reasons, I enjoyed photographing, and Shoemaker was just a neat subject.
Have a picture here of Tom Seaver. I want you to tell me a little bit about the technique that you get to produce a photo such as this.
Well, Seaver posed for that in the studio in New York. He posed in Sports Illustrated studio, and it was just an idea. It was multiple strobe lights and color gels on it, and and this kind of thing is something I enjoyed doing. It was technically difficult, but fun to do. And when I pitched the idea to Tom, he loved it, and it was real simple. He spent a few hours in the studio, and that's when I took that picture. And I don't remember, that one did not run on the cover of Sports Illustrated and ran inside, but I was working on a cover story on Tom Seaver at the time, which did run.
You mentioned the '84 Olympics. There's a picture I'm going to show now, Mary Lou Retton, that one that spans 2 pages. Gymnastics, what is it about that sport that you like?
Well, certain sports, I like boxing for the same reason. Every time they do a movement, it makes good pictures. I admire, and I wish I were a better baseball photographer, because baseball, for example, there are so many, if you get a great pitcher's duel, nothing happens. That isn't so with gymnastics. Every time you're on the balance beam and then you jump off the beam, no matter what move they're doing, there is a potential picture. There's a potential picture every time a boxer throws a punch. I marvel at baseball photography. Baseball, for me, was always the hardest to photograph, because so often the best games, nothing happens. Yeah, a slam bang play at home plate is easy to photograph. A double play where the shortstop is leaping over the sliding runner to throw the ball at first, easy picture. But get a pitcher's duel. The first couple of innings you shoot the pitcher, and then nothing happens in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. It's boring, hard to do. Great baseball, but hard to do. Gymnastics was easy.
So we showed some hero shots there. So just one person in the frame. This one is Willie Mays, it's a wide shot.
Oh, this one broke my heart.
Tell me about this one.
Well, earlier you showed my picture on my 16th birthday of Alan Michi scoring the touchdown. This was the next time, second moment like that in my life. I was a Giants fan, so as much as that picture is so important today, the Colts just beat my Giants. This was Willie Mays beating my Dodgers. Even though Brooklyn moved to Los Angeles, I forgave the players. I never forgave Walter Olson, but I forgave the players. But that was the ninth inning. The playoff used to be, I see Tom Verducci here, was 3 games, right? It was the third game, and the score, the Dodgers were winning 4-2 in the ninth inning, and we're going to the World Series, my Dodgers. And I can't remember exactly how it went, but I think Harvey Keene got on second base, and Willie Mays drove in 2 runs to tie the score, and then someone drove Willie Mays in, and that was the end of LA going to the World Series in that year. 63, I believe.
So
No, I'm sorry, 62.
62. So if we're talking Willie Mays, we have to talk Hammerin' Hank Aaron. I'll show you this picture. This is back to the hero shot.
Well, I love it. Hank Aaron was one of my favorite subjects, and he is one I'm very proud of the pictures, because Hank did not like the camera. He didn't like, he was just easy to get along with, but he was not very comfortable. I think Hank Aaron would have rather not pose, but he posed for me. That was during a game, and he was very difficult to photograph. And baseball used to be, remember, the game was played in daylight. They were all day games. In the summer, when you have a black man, and particularly Hank was a dark black man, the shadow of his hat, it was very hard to photograph any player with the shadow across his face, but someone like Aaron made it even more difficult. And I'm just very proud, because I liked Hank Aaron so much. I worked real hard to make him look as good as I could. And every once in a while I hit a home run with it, and that was one of them.
Trivia question, and feel free to shout it out. Do you know where, in what city, Hank Aaron signed his first professional baseball contract? Mobile, Alabama is incorrect. Who said Winston-Salem? He got off the train, his mother put him on in Mobile, Alabama, got off the train in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and signed a contract with the Indianapolis Clowns. Could probably win a bar bid on that. Speaking of Hank Aaron, Casey Stengel is kind of going 180 degrees. Quite the character. I have a couple pictures of Casey here.
Well, Casey was the Muhammad Ali of baseball people, period. He loved the camera. He loved all the New York press photographers. He made heroes out of everyone that ever had a photograph him, because your boss always thought you were a terrific photographer. How could you miss with a guy like this? I mean, my favorite picture of him is he always winked. He would do that wink and portrait, and you couldn't miss. I think it's the first picture. There it is.
Here's the wink. It's like Papa.
Pretty easy. Anyone could take a picture of Casey Stengel. Actually, there's a Willie Mays story I'd like to tell, if I may.
Absolutely.
My favorite Willie Mays story. And of course, remember, he was a Giant when I grew up, so I was never a Willie Mays fan. I was a Brooklyn fan. But when Willie came to the Mets, I was assigned by Sports Illustrated to shoot a cover of him. And we wanted to say, hey, kid, he had such a great laugh. He liked the writers, loved the writers. I don't think he was very keen on photographers. But I set up, not a studio, I set up a strobe light, a softbox light, right next to the Giants dugout, right next to the Mets dugout. And I waited, and I was going to get Willie to pose for me right after batting practice. You have to respect, he has work to do. When he finished batting practice, I went over and I asked Willie to sit down and pose. And Willie, he said, well, I don't have time for this. So what do I want to do this for? Anyway, he finally agreed to sit down, and I was using a Hasselblad camera at the time, which has backs. You put, instead of changing film, you simply change backs. Each back had 12 pictures in it, and my assistant loaded the backs. And Willie came by, and he sat down. I had tested everything before with Polaroid back test, and Willie sat down, and he said, okay, make this quick. and I tried to get Willie to laugh. He said, well, say something funny. Well, that stopped me. I had no idea what to say to him. So I got like a half smile out of Willie. He did something like, and he said, okay, you got it. And he went into the clubhouse. Well, I knew this was not going to be an SI cover. It just wasn't going to be good enough. But it was a nice portrait of him. And then I started winding the film in the Hasselblad back. Now I had shot a test shot first, a test roll, which you'd process first, just in case your exposure was off slightly. You could fix the key roll, the roll that had the pictures that should matter. And as soon as I started winding the roll that I had just photographed Willie Mays on, it took about 2 turns, and I knew damn well there was no film in the camera. And I was stunned. Nothing like that ever happened. I'm a professional. This was well into my career already. And I didn't know what to do, and I thought for a minute, and I walked into the Giants dressing room, and at that point, Willie he had his shirt off, and he was sitting in front of his locker, doing whatever he was doing, I don't remember. And I said, Willie, I got a small problem. Would you please give me another minute or two? I'd do this very quickly. He said, what happened? I just posed for you. I said, well, Willie, it wasn't you, it was me. I said, I forgot to load the camera. I haven't seen anybody laugh so hard. He really fell off his shit. He said, you what? I said, Willie, I'm telling you the truth. I could have made up a story and bullshit him, but I didn't. I said there was no film in the camera. He said, so you want me to do this again? I said, I'd really appreciate it. And I did, I gave him a white lie. I said, I could lose my job. I wasn't in any danger of losing my job, I don't think. I certainly wasn't going to tell my editor that I didn't have any film in the camera. But he said, okay, I'll come out, but you got to make it real quick. He put on his shirt, he came out, and I just said, Willie, I have film in the camera this time, and he gave me the biggest laugh I've ever seen. And it took one frame, I knew I had something real good. It turned out that's not the picture we chose for the cover anyway, but it's a very good picture.
See, you said you always remember your first cover. This was it, right?
Y.A. Tittle.
Y.A. Tittle, first cover, November of '61, right?
My team.
Your team.
The New York Giants quarterback, yes. And my first cover, and I was lucky enough, we used to close covers 4 or 5 weeks in advance then, rather than later on we called it fast color when we could get it in. The week of the game, we actually could close the cover, and it was on the newsstand 4 days later. That was closed 4 weeks early, and I had been sent down to Texas to shoot Texas-Oklahoma in the Cotton Bowl. And it turned out, and that was going to be my first cover. It was a young running back named Jimmy Saxton, I remember. Weighed about 150 pounds. But it was a beautiful portrait of him, and that was going to be my first cover. And I shot this game. I worked on a story on George Preston Marshall, who owned the Redskins. And the Giants were playing the Redskins, and when the game started, I finished with Preston Marshall. I shot some pictures of the game, and turned out that cover went 1 week before Jimmy Saxton. So I had my first and second cover in consecutive weeks.
And then the iconic picture of Ali standing over Liston. You talked in the piece about preparation and being prepared for it. Preparation and luck, how did that fit into getting the right shot?
Well, I truly have never met a good photographer who's modest. So if I tell you that I'm modest, I'm not being modest about this. Luck in sports photography is at least 50% of the game. You have to be in the right seat. Sports Illustrated had 2 ringside seats at Ali Liston. This was the second fight in Lewiston, Maine. There's a photographer between Ali's legs. His name was Herb Sharfman. He was my competitor. He was the other Sports Illustrated photographer. Now, Herb Sharfman took one of the greatest boxing pictures ever. It's called The Rubber Face. It's a picture of Marciano and not Ezra Charles, Marciano and, I'll think of who Marciano was fighting in a second, but Rocky Marciano punching, Come
on, Google machine.
Well, anyway, it's called The Rubber. Herbie took that picture. But that night, he is sitting in a seat, and when Ali knocked Liston down, Ali is looking right at me, and Herbie is looking right up at Ali's rear end. Now, Ali was a pretty good-looking guy, but picture of Ali's rear end wasn't going to be the picture of the night. So the only thing I will say, and the only thing I will take credit for, is that what you're paid to do, I mean, this was the way this was my job, was when you're lucky, and I was very lucky to be in the right seat, you're not supposed to miss, and that night I didn't miss.
Jersey Joe Walcott. There we go. Wrong Google machine.
By the way, Jersey Joe Walcott was the referee that night at the Liston. It's very controversial because he forgot to count. He wasn't an experienced referee. And when he couldn't get Ali to a neutral corner, he lost track of the count. And there are, well, to this day, there are people who believe that Liston either took a dive or he should have been allowed to continue fighting because he was down for 12 seconds, apparently.
So one of my favorite things to do at games is to go up to photographers and ask them if they have any film in the camera, and they start answering, oh, we don't use it. How has digital photography, how have digital cameras changed the business of photography?
For starters, you can never make the mistake I made, because if you don't have a digital card in the camera, you don't see anything in the back of the camera. It's really, it's so easy as you get older to start talking about the good old days and how much better things were. The cameras, the lenses, the ability to shoot in dim light situations, they're better. They're just much better. They're not a little better. They're much better. The quality of the photographs you're seeing today are fabulous. In my opinion, it's still a photographer. You're still going to see great pictures from Annie Leibovitz. You'll see great pictures from any of the really top photojournalists, Mark Seliger, Walter Yostel, the people that, it's still the photographer, because you've still got to compose the frame. You've got to choose the focal length, or what lens you want to. You have to choose the position you're going to shoot from for the most part. But it certainly is, it's much easier. The latitude of digital is a lot greater in terms, with film you had to be very close to right on the correct exposure, very close, or it wasn't going to look good on the page. You could, if you had a great picture, they might publish it, but it wouldn't look very good. So film was much harder to work with, really, than the digital cameras are. But the fact is, the cameras, the lenses, it's just better. And the pictures, the good photographers are still taking great pictures today.
How about some questions from the assemblage here? If you have a question, raise your hand and you can go ahead and shout it out. Josh Graham?
What's the most upset you've made somebody because of a photo?
The most upset you have made someone because of a photo?
It's a very, very easy question to answer. I did a hydroplane race. I have no idea what the name of the guy was, for Sports Illustrated, black and white story. And I can't take the blame for this, but I photographed the guy who won the race at the end with a beautiful woman who was with him, who happened not to be his wife, and the picture was published. And I never wanted to run. The other thing I did, I did work on a very, very interesting, in fact, I've never worked on another story like it, but I worked on the basketball fix in 1961 in Kansas City, college basketball. And Sports Illustrated had been tipped off that St. Joseph's was deeply involved, and they made, we call it the Final Four. Then it was the NCAA Finals. And I went with a young writer named Ray Cave, who eventually became managing editor of Time Magazine and was my boss at Time Magazine. And we knew who the players were. And so I had a picture that I shot everybody so I wouldn't tip so nobody would get the feeling that I knew. But there was a guy named, I think his name was Majewski, the player, that there were four of the players, and the opening page in Sports Illustrated ran with simple headline, Portrait of a Fixer. I never wanted to run into him again. I know he wasn't happy with me, but neither was the guy who was published with a woman who wasn't his wife.
Who else has a question? Larkin.
Most unlikable person you ever covered?
Most unlikable person you ever covered?
I hope there aren't too many Red Sox fans here. But I've only gone, and after a while, when I was pretty successful and could get away with it, I was assigned to photograph a cover on Jim Rice for Time magazine. Now, we don't put baseball players on the cover of Time magazine very often, but I was assigned to do Jim Rice. I went up to Fenway Park, and by then I was pretty established, very established. And the Red Sox were very keen on the idea of Jim Rice being on the cover. And the reason we were going to put him on the cover was he was hitting 400, I think it was the beginning of September, it certainly would have been the end of August. He was hitting 400, and I won't go into the long story, but I brought my son with me, and he embarrassed me in front of my son. He really had no interest in my being there. I never met Jim Rice before. I had no idea why or what his reasons were. But I called up the editor of the magazine. I called managing editor at home, and I said, listen, I can't do this. And I sent someone else. And I went home, and there is a God, because Jim Rice immediately went into a slump. He never hit 400, and he never ran on the cover. He's the most unpleasant person I ever met in terms of his subject.
Who else? Back there, David?
With the demise of dailies and daily newspapers and magazines, is there a future for photojournalism?
Is there a future for photojournalism given the demise of the print product?
Well, it's a lot harder. Happily, I'm glad there I can say I was there for the good old days. It's much tougher, but a photographer, when I talk to young photographers, if they love photography, if you want to travel the world first class, and you want to be able to stay at the best hotels and go to the best restaurants and get paid very well, there isn't much of a future right now. But newspapers all around the country, small town newspapers, if you like taking pictures, and I do like taking pictures, there are plenty of opportunity. It just isn't, there's no more Life. When I started out, there was a weekly Life magazine selling 8 million copies a week. There was Look magazine every 2 weeks selling, I think, 4 or 5 million. There was a Saturday Evening Post, Newsweek, and Time. The magazines there are so few. Sports Illustrated is now a monthly. It isn't the same magazine it was. I mean, they still do beautiful pictures, but it's not the same magazine that it was. So, to answer your question, if you want to work in the big leagues, it's a very tough profession. If you enjoy taking pictures, there are plenty of opportunities. There are plenty of places where people shoot sports. Listen, you can shoot sports for a college newspaper. You can shoot it for a high school newspaper. You can do lots of wonderful things, but not on the level that once was available to the best photographers.
Question? Michael? The one that got away.
Is there one that you wished you would have had?
Oh, I'm sure there are. I can't think. I once suggested a story to Time magazine. I was lucky enough one year to ski with Gerald Ford when he was president. And so I said, it's wonderful. World leaders, presidents relax through sport. So I suggested to Time magazine that we tried to reach out and do as many of them as we could do playing sport. And I wanted to start with the Pope, who was then a swimmer at a pool. And I kept thinking of the Italian Pope in his Italian bikini. And that, and I sent it, we didn't have email, whatever it was, he sent the telex to the Rome Bureau of Time magazine. And only because the managing editor was a friend of mine, they took this seriously. And got back to me, and they would not pitch that to the Vatican, and didn't. So that one got away. I always thought that would be but we could have had so many of them play golf. I mean, how many presidents haven't played golf? Kennedy swam. I mean, Kennedy wouldn't have been one of the ones at that point, but do some world leaders that either like to ski. I'm trying to think. Gerald Ford played tennis, I think, as well as skied. There were a bunch of them. I forgot. I had researched it. But the Pope swimming, they put a pool in for the Pope. I thought, it's natural. How could you miss? And that one got away.
I think they put a pool in for the Pope is a great title for a movie.
To answer, the power of magazines was fascinating then, because if Time magazine pitched the Vatican on the idea of could we get a picture of the Pope in the swimming pool, they would have at least responded. You might have got it. Anyway, the Rome Bureau took this they took it in the wrong way, I think.
Scott?
You talk about a lot of the people that you photograph, but let's just do a little hypothetical here, right? Can you imagine what it would have been like to photograph a guy like Ty Cobb, the ferocious type of player he is, not only on the base pass, but, his overall demeanor and the way he went about doing things?
Could you imagine photographing Ty Cobb, the Jim Rice of his time?
But when you look at the pictures you see of Ty Cobb are great, so who knows, he might have been a great subject. Most, unlike a writer, has to sit and meet the subject most of the time. You want to talk to the subject, and particularly in those days when you actually could have one-on-one sessions rather than the press pool coming in. I never met, I probably had 100 of my published covers where I never so much as shook hands with the subject. I photographed a football game, and we put whatever running back or quarterback or defensive back or whatever we put on the cover of the magazine. I never met the subject. I photographed Olympics. I never met 90% of the athletes. So Ty Cobb would have been a great subject. I would love to photograph Ty Cobb. Maybe if I had to deal with him, I wouldn't have felt so good. Ron Shelton did a movie called Cobb, which I did some stills on for Ron's. And boy, I remember thinking then, what a great subject he would have been. I don't know. There's a great picture of him flying through, I think he's sliding into third base. Is that the famous picture? And he'd have been a good subject.
Well, I mean, the guy sharpened the spikes right out.
Yeah, but he wasn't aiming the spikes at the photographer.
As long as you didn't photograph him with pictures of someone who wasn't his wife. Others, back there.
Does the potential perception of a picture enter your mind when you're taking it? I think of the photo of Ali from the front contrast with the most iconic picture of Babe Ruth, which is from behind. And does the perception of what that's going to look like ever enter your mind while you're taking it?
Does the perception ever enter your mind while you're taking it?
Well, sometimes I have an idea of what I could, but with sports, with action, I knew Nat Fine, the photographer who took the famous Babe Ruth picture. In fact, I believe it's the first sports picture to win a Pulitzer Prize. I'm not sure, but he won the Pulitzer Prize. He had no idea. He had no idea that was going to happen. I mean, he was in the dressing room, he photographed Babe Ruth. There's a couple of beautiful pictures of Ruth getting ready to come out that day. Sometimes you have a plan, sometimes you don't. Sometimes the plan works, sometimes it doesn't. And the reverse is when you accidentally get something that you never anticipated. I mean, I don't know if that answers your question, but...
One back there. Is that you, Nicole? I can't see with the lights. Go ahead.
You mentioned a couple of sports that are harder or easier or there's more action. What was your favorite sport to shoot and hardest sport to shoot?
Favorite sport to shoot, hardest sport to shoot.
Well, I mean, of the major sports, boxing was clearly my favorite, but mainly I did 35 of Ali's fights and 30 plus sessions in the studio, one-on-one where he's either posing for the cover of Sports Illustrated or posing for an inside page or whatever. I love boxing. My father was a boxing fan. I grew up watching the Friday night fights, so I like that. And as I said, other major sports. I mean, basketball, hockey, football, boxing, horse racing, every play, every moment there is potentially a photograph. As I said earlier, I love photographing baseball. I got excited every year about the World Series, but it's very hard to photograph because, I mean, I saw Sandy Koufax pitch a gazillion times. If he had a good game, there were no pictures. I mean, you got a good picture of him in the first inning or the second inning. You shot him from the third base side. If you could move to the first base side, you shot him from the first base side. Maybe you did a third angle from behind home plate. Magazine's going to use one picture of Koufax. What else can you do? So unless you get a game, I mean, the most exciting baseball game I ever photographed, I photographed 2 games that had big fights. I happened to be in San Francisco the day that Juan Marichal decided to bop Johnny Roseborough on the head with his bat. Bingo, you know, I mean, but how can you miss? And the second time was a play at home plate. The Yankees, Sports Illustrated ran it, I think, for 4 pages and a cover. I can't remember who the 2 players were. Play at home plate, they got up slugging each other. It was like a heavyweight title fight. When those things happen, you can't miss. But baseball is a beautiful sport. It's a beautiful sport to watch, and it's a beautiful sport to just enjoy. Sit in the stands is a great way to spend a lovely summer day. But photographing it, if you have a good game, a good pitcher's game, and nothing happens, it's hard to do. Like I said, a second play at home plate, easy. Play at second base, easy. Good play at third base might be easy. When I was shooting, it wasn't as easy to shoot the great plays in the outfield. The lenses today, and we talk about digital, are so much better that you can see a lot of that. The lighting in the stadium is that much better, too. Night games were always difficult. In the years where I was shooting, it was very hard to shoot a night game because in color, it just didn't, and as I said, the shadows during the summer were terrible. I mean, you could never see a face. You had a big shadow, not a face, and underneath the helmet or underneath the cap. So I found that very difficult to shoot.
Let's take 2 more, all the way in the back.
Neil, as many times as you shot Ali, was there a shot you really would like to have had outside the ring with Sonny Liston or Joe Frazier or the other side of those rivals?
Sorry, of Ali?
Sonny Liston or
Would you like to have shot the opponents in those matches against Ali?
what would you have liked to have done outside the ring on those kinds of
Well, I did. I mean, I shot a number of Sports Illustrated covers of the opponents. We used to very frequently do a preview cover. I shot all the opponents. The pictures, the Ali picture that I wish I'd shot, which I think is one of the classic, one of the great, and he was a friend of mine, was a photographer named Flip Schulke that shot, he was known for underwater photography. And Muhammad was just so sharp. He was so smart about this kind of stuff. And Sports Illustrated sent Schulke down to do, Schulke lived in Miami. They sent him to the Fifth Street Gym in 1961 or 62, I don't remember what year, to shoot a portrait of Ali, which he shot. And Muhammad looks at him and he says, "So, who else do you work for?" And he told him he worked for, Schulke said, "I work for Life magazine." And Ali said, "What kind of pictures do you take?" He said, "I take underwater pictures." And Muhammad then whispered to him secretly, he said, "I'm the only fighter in the world trains underwater. You got to come shoot me," which was completely made up. I don't think Ali could swim. And there's a very famous picture that Schulke took of which Life magazine ran for 6 pages of him supposedly training underwater. He thought he had to think of this. He had no idea who Schulke was. Never met the man. Now when boxers train, they wear heavy shoes. They wear this very heavy, I think there's lead sort of in the heel or whatever they put. They run in those, they train in those, so that when you get in the ring and you put on the light shoes, your feet, and particularly Ali, was so fast and his footwork was so good. He came up with this idea. He said, "I train in the water because when I punch," he said, "there's resistance." He said, "So when I'm out of the room, when I'm not underwater, my fist's twice as fast." And he talked Life magazine into running this. I asked Angelo Dundee one day, and Angelo Dundee said, "All I thought about was he was going to drown." Here's my fight.
Let's do 2 more. Grace,
Do you have a favorite camera?
do you have a favorite camera?
I mean, I used Nikons my whole career. In fairness, I'm what they call a Sony artisan. I represent Sony cameras. I think they're the best in the world, and they are the #1 selling camera in the world now. But, different cameras you need for different reasons. As I said, I used Hasselblad for certain things because you needed a medium format camera for that particular kind of assignment. So they're your tools. I used the best tools I could. During my years at Sports Illustrated, I used Nikon cameras the whole time.
How long was that one lens that looked like it was 8 feet long?
I'm sorry, which?
That lens that you have.
That lens, that was in those days. Now, it's funny, Sports Illustrated, we wanted to shoot from center field where you could see the catcher signaling the pitcher, and there was no other lens you could do that with. That lens was made for, there's a German lens, an Astro lens, made for Ralph Morse, because in the early days of the space program, before Alan Shepard even, they didn't let photographers on Cape Canaveral. They shot from the beach 5 miles away or so, and they bought that lens and they put it in Florida. It was at Cape Canaveral, and they shot the early days of the space program, and I shot from center field with it. It's a 2,000 millimeter lens, and the lens shake was that big. It was on it.
Anybody else? All the way over there, Scotty?
Just curious, the camera roll on your iPhone, is it 5,000 pictures, or do you think that's not art and there's nothing?
Do you have lots of pictures on your phone?
Yes, I do it. I'm embarrassed, but I like to have the option of making a 40 by 60 print out of one of my pictures when I want, and you really can't do that with the iPhone. It keeps getting better and better. There's no question about it. I bought because I work for Sony, I bought both my kids they have a camera called an RX100. It's brilliant. It looks like a toy. It's a $1,500 toy, so it's not a toy, and it has a Zeiss lens on it. It's absolutely terrific. I brought both my daughter and my son for holiday season 2 years ago with RX100s. I told them it's easy. It's like a point and shoot. I have yet to see the first picture. My daughter, it was so spontaneous. I wanted to shoot the grandkids with the camera I bought you, the expensive camera I bought you. Never happens. But the iPhones, listen, I would never say anything that was wrong with shooting with an iPhone, but a real camera's better. If you're going to make an 8 by 10 out of an iPhone picture, it's going to be just fine. But if you ever want to blow one up really big, it's not going to work. Not going to work as it should.
I think we've all learned about high-res color headshots, haven't we? Mike?
You said that you like having your name on these photos. You like to see your name out there. Do you think that because it wasn't oversaturated, only a few people could do the camera work? It's not like everybody in this room we're all amateur photographers, and it's oversaturated right now. Do you feel that somehow it was a symbiotic thing, that you made the stars just as well as they made their image? Like, when you talk about Mantle or Namath or Muhammad Ali, these names are just so singular, and because there weren't that many people out there highlighting these people, so they stand like the test of time. Do you feel like you were part of making them?
Were you part of making them famous because there weren't that many of you then?
I'm happy you asked the question, because the truth of it is, and I'm assuming that a good number of the people here are writers, I think the writers were a whole lot more important. Certainly in New York, the New York baseball writers that covered the Yankees and covered the Dodgers and the Giants when they all three teams, they were far more important than any photographers. The photographs people they like to look at it when you get a good picture. But writers and television, of course, has done so much more to build the name and the marketing value of the athletes today. I don't know how many people really read credits, photo credits. I mean, I've been a credit reader since I was a boy. As I said, my heroes were the photographers working for Life magazine and Sports Illustrated when I first started out, but I read credits. Most photographers, everyone reads the byline on a text piece. Everyone, when Dick Young was a big sports writer in New York for the Daily News, covered the Dodgers and also covered boxing. People said, did you see Young today? Mike Lupica. I remember I worked at the National with Frank DeFord. When Lupica wrote a piece, people read Tom's pieces, and they know Tom wrote it. I don't know if they know who the photographer that took the picture that's on the cover of the piece Tom wrote. So I think the writers are a lot more important in terms of what you're asking than the photographers are, and always will be, I think. And that's fine.
Was it a small network of photographers out there that you knew the other photographers doing the same shot? And even outside of sports?
Yeah, well, I knew them all because when I worked at Time Magazine, I worked at Life Magazine as well. So when you covered sports, I mean, remember, you don't send one photographer to the Super Bowl or to a fight or to the Kentucky Derby or the Masters Golf Tournament. So you're working with others all the time. And I mean, the Olympic Games, you know, there's an army of photographers, and I mean, I got to know most of them over the years. And just because I was really into the nature of photojournalism. I mean, I know Andy Leibovitz. I knew David Kennerly, and I've known a lot of the photographers that didn't shoot sports, but just Steve Shapiro. I mean, they're great photographers that I've been lucky enough to meet over the years. I follow pretty regularly, but most people don't, but they do know writers.
Let's do 2 more questions, and then we'll break. What?
I thought you said 4 questions, but that's okay.
Somebody's pointing. Where? Who's got a hand up? I can't see. All the way over. Oh, hello, Sahil. I'm sorry, I forgot about you today.
It's all good, it's all good. I'm here now. So, is there any current players, it could be any sport, that you wish you had the opportunity to shoot with, or you think it would be a cool experience to shoot with today, or that you never got to?
They're current, but you still shoot, right?
I'm doing a book on horses, and so I've been shooting a little bit now, so some of that stuff I've really enjoyed. I mean, I did a steeplechase meet in Virginia in October, I think it was, and I just had we had a beautiful day and everything. You know, it's a gorgeous sport to photograph. You know, I mean, I watch events on television, and every once in a while I kick myself, geez, I wish I could have been there. You know, I mean, some of the certainly I would have enjoyed shooting more, and he was not a great friend of photographers, Tiger Woods, but I would have liked to have photographed Tiger more. I mean, he was so photogenic and so terrific. I mean, I did 2. He should have had me follow him anyway. I only photographed Tiger twice. In 2005, I photographed the Masters, and you saw the picture, he won the Masters, and then I photographed him at St. Andrews the same year winning, and he wiped out everybody in the British Open. So he should have hired me.
The dreaded last question, all the way in the back.
Your preparation is so good and your instincts are so good. But what would you say is the best photo that you took that could be considered a fluke?
What was the best fluke photo you ever took?
Fluke?
That you didn't prepare.
Well, as a news picture, probably the picture of Johnny Roseborough getting bopped in the head by Juan Marshall, because in a million years it never entered my. In fact, we weren't going to do. This was a 3 or 4 game series in Candlestick Park in San Francisco, and because of our deadlines, the film from Saturday's game went back to New York, and that was all going to be in the story. Sunday's game was only going. The only reason they kept me there Sunday was Juan Marichal was pitching against Sandy Koufax, 2 of the greatest pitchers in the game. And who knows, if somebody, I mean, Sports Illustrated happened to have, when it was impossible to close, one of the most famous baseball games ever was a game in which Harvey Haddix pitched a perfect game for 14 innings or whatever, I forgot, 12 innings, and that was on the worst night to close, but they did it. Same thing, they kept me in San Francisco just in case. One of them could have pitched the perfect ball game, who knows? The last thing anyone thought of was somebody was going to hit one of the players in the head with a baseball bat, so that would have been the best example I can give you.
Neil, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you here. Congratulations. I think everybody here certainly appreciates your innovative approach to photography. You'll stick around for a little while after we do a little housekeeping. We have our networking after party here when we're done. Few items of housekeeping. We will remain here, as I said, for our networking after party. We invite you to stay and mingle. Pepper him with some more questions, get to know your fellow award winners as well as others who have joined us for the weekend. There are several students from area colleges and universities here who are helping out this weekend. Please get to know them as well. Tomorrow, for those staying across the street at the Marriott, breakfast buffet is between 6 and 9 at the Butcher and Bull restaurant on the main floor. For those attending our Sports Media Convergence Summit, registration is from 8 to 9 a.m. in the foyer of the Hearn Ballroom, right where we had the reception earlier. That's on the second floor. Seminars and panels will be conducted in Hearn Ballroom A. Those who have brought examples of their work to get critiqued. That's another one that my grammar nerd brain, I had a professor in college who said critique is not a verb. Perform a critique. Boxed lunches, that's in Ballroom B. Boxed lunches will be served, and you'll have the opportunity to consume them in Hearn Ballroom C. And then our awards reception will begin at 5 tomorrow at Benton Convention Center, which is across there on 5th Street, diagonally across from the hotel. That will be in the main foyer on the main level toward the back from the 5th Street entrance. And our awards dinner will begin promptly at 6:45 with the ceremony to follow, networking after party back at the Butcher and Bull afterwards, and breakfast will again be available to those staying at the hotel from 6 to 9 Tuesday morning. Again, thank you for being here, and congratulations again to all our winners. Before I go, does anybody have a copy of the awards program for this year? Anybody have a copy of the awards program? Billy Rich holding it, I'm sorry, that's Harvest. Harvest is holding it back there. The sketch for the cover, front and back, of our Hall of Famers was done by local resident Mike Wilson. Mike, would you please stand up and be recognized? I think he did a fabulous job with that. Thank you so much for that, Mike. And I would like, Sahil, you asked a question. Sahil, would you stand up? Joe Chambers, would you stand up? Jake Stewart, would you please stand up? These three gentlemen, along with Taylor Ann Hartley, who's in the middle of finals at High Point University, they interviewed many of our state winners from the past year. All of them are available on our YouTube channel. I thought they did a tremendous job. Give it up for these three, if you would. And now feel free to enjoy this small area, and the bar is open in the back, and we'll come visit. Thank you again, Neil.
Thank you.